China is planning to turn hundreds of retired Cold War fighter jets into suicide drones that could be used for massive attack on Taiwan. Keep in mind that the building of drones and creation of what they call suicide drones using actually Soviet, i.e. Russian jets, retrofitting Russian jets, is something they could also supply. They could easily supply to Russia as well if they begin supplying weapons to Russia. But it says China is reportedly planning to turn hundreds of retired Cold War fighter jets into suicide drones that could be used for a massive attack on Taiwan. And it says China's last Chengdu J-7 jets may leave active service this year, and some may be converted into drones. And it says that these planes are copies, of course, of the Soviet MiG-21s. In other words, they could do the same thing to the Soviet jets. They're going to begin, in other words, taking old military equipment, retrofitting them, and making them into drones, meaning that they don't have to risk losing people. It's going to be like war, but you're playing a video game. In fact, if you look at some of the U.S. military drones, they even have like video game controllers modeled after it for the drones. This is the new face of war. And they're going to be building these now. Russia and China have always been frenemies. Even during the Cold War, they oftentimes went against each other's interests. And, for example, the Amur Valley conflict. For example, Vietnam, where the Viet Cong frequently switched between, several times switched between aligning themselves with the Soviet Union or China, actually angering the Chinese Communist Party so much when the Viet Cong finally did ally with Russia that the CCP actually invaded Vietnam after America left Vietnam in the Vietnam War. If the Chinese Communist Party is aligning itself with Russia, the Russian Federation, if the Chinese Communist Party is beginning to supply Russia with weapons, if there's a line drawn in the sand and China even invades Taiwan, China is going to become a military enemy to the United States, even though they would already say that they are enemies to us, and handing over the ability to even declare and manage health pandemics in the United States, which is not just viruses. They could declare gun violence a pandemic. They could declare race relations a pandemic or a public health crisis. They could declare almost anything a public health crisis and then dictate the policies. Handing that over to the World Health Organization, which cannot demonstrate its independence from the CCP. Remember, under Trump, that was the finding. Means that they will allow the Chinese Communist Party to dictate American policy. And that should never happen. The Biden administration is moving on this, and frankly, it interestingly contradicts, I think seriously contradicts, the other, I think, statements they're making when it comes to Russia and war and the possibility of where we might be heading. Basically, Russia is aligning with China, and Blinken, Secretary of State Blinken, is basically saying, if you do this, this is war. This is where the line is. And they understand the significance of the CCP beginning to arm Russia militarily. Again, this means the country with the biggest landmass and the country with the most resources and all the oil and gas and everything China could dream of is going to be aligned with the country with the most people and the manufacturing capability to take all that Soviet-era technology and build one of the most powerful militaries on Earth. And Blinken saying, don't do it. If you do it, this is war. And let me show you this. Epoch Times has a story. It says the Chinese regime could be considered providing lethal aid to Russia, according to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, which, if confirmed, would represent an unprecedented escalation of China's presence in the Russian-Ukraine war. There's a quote. For the most part, China has been engaged in providing rhetorical, political, and diplomatic support to Russia, but we have information that gives us concern that they are considering providing lethal support to Russia in the war against Ukraine, Blinken told ABC's The Week program on Sunday, after meeting with China's top diplomat Wang Yi at the Munich Security Conference. Wang Yi also just went to Russia, by the way. Wang spoke at the conference on February 18th and said the Chinese regime is working on a peaceful proposal peacefully arming them to reconcile the two sides of the conflict. Blinken indicated that the stipulated intention appears to run contrary to what is indicated in intelligence held in the United States. The CCP does that often. They just lie about things. And Blinken said, there are various kinds of lethal assistance that they are at least contemplating providing, to include weapons. And he added Washington would soon release additional details. He warned that Beijing's said assistance to Russia would mean, quote, serious consequences for the U.S.-China relationship, and U.S. concerned China is considering this, providing this. At the same time, I mentioned that Wang Yi visited Russia, the same diplomat. And he said that they're going to work to improve global governance. And they're going to, he said when it came to Ukraine, they exchanged their opinions, and he did not elaborate on what they talked about. So we don't actually know the full details of what happened. That said, folks, as this does take place, so keep in mind, diplomacy, public statement, political rhetoric, most of it doesn't mean anything. It's just saying what you want to hear and trying to cool things down. Especially when you're dealing with countries like China and like Wang Yi, their diplomat. What they say is rarely true. They're just saying basically things to disarm people. They're trying to disarm the United States, trying to say, calm down, we're not doing anything. We're just going to help them, and we're going to help you too. We're not against you. We're just going to be supplying them some weapons. But, we can still trade. We can still manufacture your medicines. We can still be your manufacturing powerhouse. We can still use our slaves to make your Nikes. Everything's good. Business as usual. Don't throw a wrench in the machine. Just stay out of it. That's the message they're sending right now. But as this happens, you have essentially China under threat now from the United States. Russia getting sanctioned, pushed to China. That means they're going to be dependent on the Chinese financial system. If China gets sanctioned, they're going to push fully into their financial system. They're already being sanctioned. And especially with the chips and so on, they're being basically pushed towards very old technology. They're basically going to put everything they have into building this alternate world order. In other words, you're going to watch the rise of a new global order. And China, as well with this, is probably going to launch its own ambitious military campaigns, the first target being Taiwan. We're going to be watching a propaganda war now. And as we go into a propaganda war, it's important to realize what the purpose of this is. They're trying to demoralize you. Now, when you get into wartime states, a wartime mentality, and keep in mind that can exist even when you're not in a hot war, even when you don't have your troops fighting each other on the field. You can enter an ideological war, even an open ideological war. With this, folks, what China is doing now is beginning a very open ideological battle. And it says here that Chinese state media continued to have a field day with the Ohio train disaster on Tuesday and Wednesday, crowing that the calamity has become a viral sensation on Chinese social media because it exposes the corruption, incompetence, and hypocrisy of the U.S. government. They're saying many netizens, when criticizing the U.S. for not properly handling the disaster, also questioned if the U.S. government is trying to deliberately withhold information and hype a balloon incident involving China to divert domestic media attention. It's the opposite of what we had in the United States, where many people believed that the balloons were a distraction. The balloons were a distraction from Ohio. Sorry, it's the same thing, right? That America is basically the Biden administration, one of the conspiracies, you could call it, or rumors, is they were using the Chinese balloons as a way to divert public attention from real disasters like Ohio, and basically the fact that the Biden administration, shut down the unions that were saying a disaster is coming if you guys don't listen to us. And pretty much this is a big scandal for them. And so they said, hey, forget the left hand, look at the right hand, watch the birdie while I do my magic trick, that type of thing. But keep in mind, separate, truth from intentional propaganda meant to demoralize you. What you're witnessing is intentional propaganda meant to demoralize you. Basically, the CCP, Global Times, and so on, they questioned Chinese students in the United States. It's not clear whether these are real or not, because Global Times tends to just fabricate things. But this is what they're doing. And they're trying to say that our system is better than your system. Remember, what we're going to be watching is a battle of global alliances. We're going to be watching a battle of global systems, in particular political systems. And individually, remember during Afghanistan where you had a counterinsurgency, they called it COIN, COIN, operations. The battle for hearts and minds, do you remember the battle for hearts and minds in Afghanistan? You're going to be watching the same thing here. There's going to be a COIN operation in America. There's going to be a COIN operation in Russia. There's going to be a COIN operation in China. And each nation is going to be battling for the hearts and minds of the local population. They're going to be targeting you with propaganda. They're going to be targeting you with things exactly like this. And it's going to try to accelerate your discontent with the way things are and try to convince you that their system is the solution. I would say keep your head on your shoulders. It's fine to, of course, recognize the problems we have here, but keep your heads on your shoulders.